welcome to the House of ZK Radio, which is a focused podcast and media channel exploring everything ZK, zero knowledge. Hi, everyone. My name is Alice. I am host of House of ZK Radio. I'm joined here with Lumi, who is Senior Product Manager at the core protocol of Arbitrum. So really excited to have you here today, Lumi.
Liz, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering, can we hear a bit more about your origin story into the Web3 space and into the ZK space? And I know that you previously, worked at had a lot of ZK focus. So you did some independent ZK work. You worked at ZK Sync. Now you're at Arbitrum. So very curious to hear about your story into the space.
Yeah. So actually, funny enough, the first time I looked into crypto was 2011, Bitcoin. I was an anti-conformist little teenager, so it's like free money, like free from control. And I started reading into the white paper, and I was like, that's a Ponzi scheme. I'm still not entirely convinced that Bitcoin is not the Ponzi economics, but basically I ignored blockchain for the next 4 years. What really brought me in actually was zero knowledge proofs, right? So the concept of being able to prove something publicly on-chain without revealing the inputs just was mind-blowing, right? Verifiable computation shouldn't make sense mathematically, or algebraically. So that's when I got really interested. I had a comfy job at the time, but essentially it was a bug that grew in my brain, I couldn't get rid of it, right? And it got more and more. I started spending 8 to 10 hours a day on top of a normal job. That was a lot, just researching into blockchain, crypto. I did decide to, what was this year, 2018 or something. I decided to quit my Web 2 job. I actually was trying to take a break, but basically people started offering me money to do consultancy and doing exactly what I would have done for fun anyway. So I specialized in fractal scaling and decentralizing provers, sequencers, some work on governance models. And part of this there wasn't a whole lot of people doing fractal scaling, right? So I was doing a consulting project for Matter Labs, the inventor of ZK Sync. They brought me on as the senior product manager or product owner of ZK Stack to build it out for them. And I left that job a couple months ago, and I just joined Arbitrum as senior product manager of core protocol.
Nice.
Or off-chain labs for Arbitrum.
Nice. And it's really great to hear that you became interested in this space again, and specifically that the main cause of your interest was through ZK. So I'm wondering, compared to when you first got involved in the ZK space, all those years ago, were there any kinds of challenges at that time that you see that are being addressed today, or any kinds of trends, any kinds of new foreseeable challenges, new opportunities that you see coming to this space? Just wanted to hear your general thoughts on some of the trends that you've seen.
Yeah, so I think there's a few aspects to that. First of all, proving at the time was prohibitively expensive. And so that was sort of the biggest problem that you had, was it wasn't cheap enough to use for real-world applications. That's compared to now with something like ZKVMs. We can just use a generalized ZKVM to prove the state transition function, so prove the chain. And basically the results that some of these ZKVM developers are seeing is if you amortize sort of transaction costs, it's a fraction of a penny per transaction. So all of a sudden that starts being really affordable, and especially for some use cases like banks needing to trust each other, they could prove their state onto a blockchain instead, and for them, 1 cent a transaction is nothing, because basically without these chains, they have to spend billions of dollars a year hedging counterparty risk and having to trust each other. So just getting it to the point of cheap enough to use was one big thing. The other really big difference is just developer experience, right? It's a pain writing custom circuits, right? And usually it's super easy to under-constrain, and it just creates a really large attack surface, right? So I call this with higher level languages like Noir, which is the first truly higher level language, or the ZKVMs, I call it the DOS moment. So back in the day, before sort of DOS you had to make a different operating system depending on what your architecture of the computer was, right? Every one of them needed its own. Then DOS came about. Microsoft stole DOS, and basically you could use one operating system for regardless of the computer architecture. So this is kind of the moment that we're in ZK now. Now you have a higher level language like Noir where you don't have to know how to write circuits. Like it really just looks like normal coding, right? We had this like private contract or public variables, private variables concept in programming for a long time, right? So all of a sudden it starts getting really easy for people to develop like custom circuits for ZK. And even more than that, like these ZKVMs, you can just write things in Rust and C and prove any application. Like all of a sudden, like you don't have to know that ZK is in the background at all. In fact, like if developers know about zero knowledge proofs, like the math behind it, we probably fucked up, right? So now you can just write any program and then it's verified, like it's proven, right? And you don't have to worry about the intricacies between. So I honestly think it's a ground shifting moment that we're in ZK where you can start getting to mass market because it just opens up the time of developers to focus on their product rather than having to worry about circuits and am I going to get hacked today?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of ZKVMs are really trying to push the fact that developers don't need to worry about writing circuits anymore. Instead, they can focus on the business logic behind their applications, actually building the application. So it's a very exciting time that we're in. But I'm wondering, with that general trend of adding these more and more abstraction layers on top of the traditional way of handwriting these circuits. Are there any kinds of trade-offs that you can see that maybe in some scenarios would, say, using or writing these custom circuits be more advantageous in some use cases? I mean, you spoke about a lot on the benefits of the developer experience when it comes to these higher level abstractions, but wondering if there are any kinds of trade-offs or limitations that we should consider.
So this is something actually, we had a panel here at House of ZK on the future of ZK, and this is actually a question that came up is, should you write things in custom circuits or ZKVMs, right? And the reality is like, it's kind of interesting. Like there are some different considerations for this. So Varnish, she's been a vocal advocate of like custom circuits and that ZKVMs won't reach like mass scale because basically if you develop an application and you get big enough, you start seeing much more cost savings if you write a custom ZK circuit compared to something that's generalized will always be more expensive, right? So her argument is that as companies get bigger, they will start to implement custom circuits, which I do actually consider like that is a realistic future for zero knowledge proofs. Like we do still, like in some applications, we still write things in assembly, even though it's not a higher level language because you're trying to really, really hyper optimize your application for cost, for throughput. So that is actually an intellectually interesting consideration. But then there's the other part of like, but you're also increasing your attack surface a lot, right? Like any cryptography is a function of time makes money. Like how long has this been live? How much money is there as a reward if someone hacks it, right? So I personally actually am more on the ZKVM side. Like I as a programmer never wrote assembly at all, right? And I did try to make like high throughput applications. The cost savings in a way just wasn't enough, right? So maybe Apple will write their own custom circuits, but I honestly personally tend to believe that most applications will be on ZKVMs because then when you have these standards, you can start making hardware acceleration for them, like you can start making custom hardware to accelerate them, and it works at a global level because it's a common stack that people are using.
Right. So yeah, and on the optimization side, there's still some other areas where ZKVMs can really accelerate it, like with hardware acceleration. I know there's a couple of ZKVMs also using precompiles to try to speed up certain operations. So this kind of topic on efficiency is not just constrained to just circuits. I see. So I also wanted to hear some more of your thoughts of just the general ZK landscape. So there's been a lot of talks of oh, ZK is going to be the end game. It's going to be our most dominant like cryptographic primitive that we're using in, say, for example, privacy applications. Very curious to hear about your thoughts on this, and if there are any other kinds of tools that you see that may have potential and also contributing to maybe a more privacy-centric future, or if you see maybe like a combination of multiple different primitives playing out, or if you just see ZK as kind of the dominant primitive. So wanted to hear your thoughts on this.
So I personally, I do believe ZK is the end game, right? And this one was something I always liked Off-Chain Labs for. It always said this of like, it's not the fact that Arbitrum won't use ZK. The question is, when is it safe to use? When is it cheap enough to use where it doesn't become a prohibitive cost? And ZK's moved really, really fast, which is, turns out, like crypto's the best form of funding for cryptography, because now you have billions of dollars you can make if you come up with a new primitive. So this is something that we're working on internally at Off-Chain Labs, is to enable also ZK native chains, right? But there is this question of like ZK proving was expensive, it still is expensive, right? And for some applications don't care about that cost, right? Like to them, a couple cents, a cent, it doesn't make a difference, right? But really high throughput applications care a lot about even tiny fractions of a penny, right? All of a sudden, like if we're talking like Visa level usage, like you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, that makes the difference. So for some applications, fraud-proof chains make way more sense, and it gets to a level of scalability and enabling developers or enabling real-world applications to use it as well. Because really, like, if we're talking about 300 TPS, 10,000 TPS, a million TPS, like, we're children playing in a kindergarten. Like, real-world applications need millions of TPS. If we want to bring all of TradFi, all of like these new applications that we're building as well. The one part that ZK does have like a longer term end game benefit for is for the interoperability, right? So at some point, Ethereum will also become a ZK native chain in order to enable rollups to have sort of trustless interoperability. And that's where ZK starts making a difference. There are other ways to sort of fulfill that promise of interoperability that don't require ZK, but I think in the long run, it will be the future. That is something that I think anyone that's intellectually honest kind of realizes over time. It's not perfect for everything though, right? Like you can't, like for example, like a private application, you can't have a count model with pure zero knowledge proofs, right? So for that, it's FHE or MPC, where you start needing to have it if you want privacy, right? Which I hope we do. So it kind of, it's a little bit of mixing and matching. Like it doesn't, like we should use the best tools that are available rather than just saying one thing fits everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really like how you kind of phrase it, that it's not like a cookie cutter solution where we can just apply ZK to everything and then, you know, all of our problems that we're seeing will be solved, but it really depends on the type of use case. And really like how you also mentioned that in the interoperability space, ZK, we can expect many use cases coming from it. And then also just on the topic of use cases in general, just very curious to hear about some that you've personally find very exciting, or maybe those that are even beyond what we see in our Web3 space.
Yeah, so this is the thing people don't realize in blockchain is ZK doesn't just apply to blockchain. It's just verifiable computation, right? It's like we've never had verifiable computation in the history of humanity. Like every bank needs to trust every other bank and hedge risk and audit. Like any execution of a program like is trusted when it goes from one source to another. Like this is a paradigm shifting type of cryptography, right? And I can give some examples that I do find interesting, but I think the important thing to think about here is the fact that linear thinking is very easy. When the internet came out, you thought, oh, we'll make a digital newspaper instead of a newspaper. What they really didn't realize is social media is going to eat their fucking pants, right? And that sort of abstract thinking is much harder. So I think in general, by applying this cryptography, we're going to have use cases that are hard to imagine now. There are a bunch of really cool applications already today. So for example, like I know some of these are like commonly heard, but for example, identity, it's every service we sign up for, every bank, every Uber, like any of these applications that we sign up for, we basically have to give them all of our data. Right? In the US, you're also giving away your social security number, which can be used to steal your identity. And if any one of those services gets hacked, you basically lost your identity, right? It's really super dangerous what we're doing. So ZK identity is the sort of easy answer where there's like really direct product market fit, where now you could just provide a proof issued by your government that you're a legal person, you're over this age, instead of saying which specific age, like that you paid your taxes without having to give away like all your financial privacy every single time. Like, so that's one really direct one. There's a lot of other applications that we're starting to see but aren't sort of out yet. So one of those is like, am I allowed to say Trump grabbing pussy on this podcast? So like the problem is, in this world where we have all these AI agents, right? And anyone, like, those AI agents are better at writing text than most of my friends, right? Especially the engineering side. How do you know what's true anymore? And that sounds like a small thing, but that is literally breaking down the fundamental trust model of all of society. Like, we trust each other. I trust that you're not gonna stab me right now. Like this is how our like humanity has developed. And the problem is, when you start losing trust, all of a sudden it's like there is no truth anymore, right? So one of those examples for ZK for that is you can essentially have a trusted element like a TE in a camera, which records the time and the place that it was taken. So if you take a picture of grabbing a pussy, you know for a fact that it was there. But where does ZK come in here? So like, if that newspaper then uploads that photo and says, hey, like, he did this, basically, like, you all of a sudden you've changed the picture, right? So that location data, that timestamp doesn't apply anymore. Like, you have no way to prove that this image was down compressed from a raw format, which they always do, right? Or if you put a filter on it, all of a sudden that data it doesn't match anymore. You don't know if it's true. So basically, you can run like through the transformations with ZK, so you can prove that you downsized it and it is still that original photo, that he really did this, and all of a sudden Trump can't just say, no, I didn't do that, right? Maybe I shouldn't have used a political example, but it's a good example of like the breaking down of trust, of like people can just invent anything they want and then people believe it, or don't believe it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really starting to see these redefining of our current trust models. And yeah, I really like that point you also mentioned about kind of going away from having that kind of linear thinking, like what you mentioned when people were first thinking about those physical newspapers becoming digital. It's just like, oh, it's not just these digital newspapers, but there's so many other applications that came from it, like with social media.
I think like another one that's really good for this is the way the world works today with banks is every single bank trusts every single other bank, right? It's really a loaded setup. Like, this is a horrible system. And the funny thing is, people think that banks are this giant mafia that they all talk together. They hate trusting each other. For them, trust translates to cost, right? So the way the world works today is, if someone falls asleep on a computer in China and adds some zeros to some account, basically, like, the other bank won't know this. They do auditing, but basically, if one guy could start crashing the financial system around the world, if there's a big enough scandal in this, or a big enough scam, and this really, again, translates to counterparty risk. Like these banks have to spend billions of dollars to hedge that risk against each other. So one way that you could rebuild this financial system in a way that one market does not affect another market, and that the banks don't have to, that they really have a shit ton of, like, a real product market fit for this, is you can have different banks on different ZK L2s or L3s. And at this point, if that other bank's able to generate a proof that there's, like, they have the funds that they say they have, that they didn't rehypothecate the funds too much, and they're able to send that to another chain, all of a sudden, every bank saves billions of dollars. Like, you remove that counterparty risk, you don't have to hedge for it anymore. You don't have to have this silly system of, like, every bank auditing every other bank, and you can imagine like there's thousands of banks in the US alone. Like you can see how unscalable this system is. So that's a very direct use case of the succinct property of ZK today.
Right. Yeah, and I like how you address that. There's multiple properties of ZK that we can utilize. Like first with the privacy aspects, which can have many kinds of applications, even within identity verification, and then also with that succinctness property as well with scaling. So lots of diverse use cases that can come from it. Okay, yeah, great. And I'm also wondering, just with your new role at Arbitrum, and now with your kind of focus within just scaling for Ethereum, very curious to hear more about how you see the roll-up-centric roadmap playing out, maybe ZK's potential role in it, your general thoughts on this roadmap.
So there's two major benefits to the roll-up-centric roadmap. First one is just the diversity in development. Like we don't get paid by Ethereum, right? We have our own interest to develop new applications, to develop different ways. Like we can see from EVM wasn't perfect. It's far from perfect. Solidity is also very far from perfect, right? So by having this roll-up-centric ecosystem, you get a large variety of different developers implementing things different ways, and this enables those use cases that maybe you can't imagine beforehand. So you get like this sort of exponential iteration, exponential growth by having this large developer set. But the main thing that like you're trying to solve with a roll-up-centric Mac is scalability, right? Again, like there's some chains out there that promise that, oh no, they can scale forever. They're doing maybe 500 TPS, even if, okay, they say different numbers, but reality is like they reach about 500 max, right? That's nowhere near enough to enable real-life applications. So even if they get that to 10,000, 100,000, it just won't work. And the problem with blockchain that you have, it's a feature and a bug, right? So in a traditional like computing system, basically like the internet, for example, like if you have 1,000 people ordering iPhones, pre-ordering iPhones, and they're served that website from one server, like that can work. Everyone can use that same shared resource, that one server. But the problem is if you start having tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, that server will crash. And either you need a really powerful supercomputer, like one single computer to handle all of that internet traffic, or what you can do is you just add more like servers. And now the next 1,000 get it from a different server, the next 1,000 get it from a different server. So internet scales linearly according to resources allocated to it, right? Blockchain doesn't have that. Blockchain basically, every single node on that network, like the whole point of blockchain is consensus, trustlessness, right? So in order to reach consensus, essentially every single computer on the network needs to re-execute every single transaction over and over again. So if you add 10 validators or 1 million validators or 100 million validators, you still have only 1x scalability. Right, and our choice in Ethereum, and well, this applies to every blockchain, is basically you have to limit the amount of transaction throughput, the resources that this network could consume in order to have a larger decentralized set of validators, which again, kind of the whole point of blockchain. Like if you don't care about decentralization or the benefits from it, just use AWS. AWS works really well, right? So this is a fundamental problem to scalability of like you can't go limitlessly. You can't arbitrarily scale the system at all. Like you have to stay at this limit and you can't like switch it on the fly. So the reality is like no blockchain will scale unless we're able to start going towards that horizontal sharding model again, right? And this is true for every computing network. Like you need to sort of like every distributed computing network, like you need to shard resources basically. So the way that we figured this out in Ethereum, so call that, okay, I'm going to get shit for saying this, but let's say the monolithic blockchain is blockchain 1.0. Then like execution sharding, the way that Ethereum 2.0 tried to do it, let's call it 2.0. The problem there was, again, you're breaking down the security for each of the shards, so each shard would get less security. And then we're kind of in like 2.5, the roll-up centric map. So now each of those shards gets 100% of the security and decentralization from Ethereum, but you're able to increase limits, right? So you can actually have much beefier computers here too to handle throughput, and you can keep adding more instances to scale horizontally. And that's kind of Ethereum 2.5, let's call it. Again, I should not be saying these numbers. Sorry, Justin. Um, but for like the next version of this is basically like this is where we're at today, and it's like it works really well. It increased scalability by a lot. Like we could just keep adding instances. Every computing system shards. Like we know how to program for asynchronous models and like having resources like some on some rollup, some on others. Like this is a paradigm we're used to. The problem there, of course, was the fragmentation and the user experience. But like this is why we're working at Off-Chain Labs on something called Universal Intense Engine. And the difference in this version of interoperability is we're really trying to enable a uniform experience across all these different shards. So instead of just building our own closed-off ecosystem, the Universal Intense Engine can plug into any EVM-L2, any EVM in general, and then enables interoperability through a set of standards so that you can have consistent developer experience, consistent user experience. And now all of a sudden, if you start getting higher and higher on that like abstraction layer, all of a sudden users don't have to know what chain they're on, right? Like, in fact, they should not know which chain they're on. They shouldn't even know they're using blockchain.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
if they know they're using blockchain, we probably just fucked up again. Like, so that's where we're putting our focus is enabling all these different chains. First of all, you can build with Orbit Stack, or you can use this interoperability layer to bridge funds or like do contract interactions from any other blockchain as well. So we're really focused on making Ethereum unified again, compared to just like building our own silo.
Yeah, and it's really great that you're trying to have this unified vision and mentioning that what comes with scaling, there's also often that caveat of fragmentation. So really great that you're kind of addressing that trade-off plane.
And I have news for the people that don't realize this. Every other blockchain will have to do this same model. Like this is not like it wasn't a choice. It's a fundamental building block to
Right.
scale to mass market.
Absolutely. And yeah, also very curious to hear more about some of the opportunities that come with the Orbit stack and with Orbit chains in general, which to my understanding, projects can have their own customizable, tailored L2s and L3 chains. So very curious to hear about kind of the intention that Arbitrum took and maybe your thoughts on having this spectrum between like general purpose versus like the idea of having like a general purpose roll-up versus like an app-specific kind of specialized roll-up. And in providing that kind of spectrum between those like two ends, how does that affect the end developer's experience? What kinds of implications it has?
Yeah, so that's Arbitrum, like the saying for Arbitrum, the tagline is, or Orbit, is your chain, your rules, right? The focus is really on enabling you to do whatever you need to do for your product and only focus on your product needs rather than having to rebuild everything we built over many years. Like that's not so easy. So that's sort of the starting principle. It goes into like a larger philosophical question of like, how does Ethereum develop, right? And just because we're talking about ZK, like this is one of the things that, for example, like Orbit chains can enable with or without ZK, but there's some like it's a different level of trust. Is you can like why do you need to run another EVM chain if you can just build Uniswap in Rust or write it in Rust and have that as a minimal rollup? Right? It's kind of like AppChain 2.0. Like you're not just running another chain to run EVM on it to run an application, and it's only the one application. It's like you're just running the raw application. You get much more throughput through that as well. It's much more scalable than having to prove all of Ethereum or having to run that program of the execution client. So personally, like this is very much a personal view. Like I think we'll start moving more and more into you just have applications. Like if you need throughput, more throughput than what being on a single like shared state, aka Arbitrum 1, you can upgrade to just having more block space through your own rollup, right? And I think like there will be some level of like you'll have these like shared ecosystems too. Like so there's a lot of gaming chains, for example, that basically provide a suite of tools for developers of games, and then you can essentially have a bunch of L3s that all use this shared resource, and that's like, there will be those general ecosystems, but there'll also be these individual apps, right? In fact, there starts being a question like when like the key part of this, first of all, is interoperability. That's, again, focus on universal intent engine. Like, you need to have consistent interoperability between these to even enable that app-specific world, right? Or even if it's many rollups, like we see how fragmented it's right now. So that's sort of the key focus. But at that point, like, let's say we fix interoperability, like, you could even have a user have just their account as a rollup. And all of a sudden, because it's just their account, proving it is much faster. You can do it on your phone. You can be your own sequencer. Like you're the only one doing transactions. So you could just have me as a rollup. Every user has their own rollup, and then you're doing essentially cross-chain interactions.
Got it. So you see kind of like a combination of those general ecosystems and also those app specific
And they can
worlds
be
as
any
well.
virtual machine too, as long as it compiles down to RISC-0. Like, you can have SVM on Ethereum. You can have MoveVM, like Mega ETH, like whatever you want, you know?
Yeah, great
And
to see how extensive it is. Yeah.
And we shouldn't be like, we should be opinionated to some degree. For example, like the user experience, but like the whole ethos of Ethereum is to enable people to do the things they want to do. Like you shouldn't have to decide for a developer what's right, what's wrong. Like it's your chain, your rules. It's your app, your rules.
Right,
Like,
giving developers that true flexibility.
right.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we close today, I'm wondering, Lumi, if you'd like to give any sorts of announcements to the audience, or if you have any advice that you'd like to give for any of most of our audience members, maybe developers, builders, any sorts of advice or closing thoughts.
I guess from like one thing that I think is important for people to hear, it's not very specific to like Arbitrum, but is people think they're coming in late, right? Like, oh, crypto's been around for a long time. It's like, how am I even going to get to? Like, there's so much work in this space, and we are far from being like anywhere near not early, right? Like, most of the real world does not use blockchain, right? We have, I don't even know how many, $2, $3, $4 trillion in crypto. It's like, there are hundreds of trillions of dollars in that could come over. Like, you are very, very early. And like, today is a good time to start building out the future, right? If the, like, I don't like watching prices, right? But a lot of people do. It's like, if you're discouraged by that, like the technology has real product market fit. We can enable more than 10x moments for, at the very least, all of traditional finance, right? We can build out these new applications, like start building, you know, like, don't get intimidated. Start going to conferences if you want to talk to people, like, or meet teams, like you will be an OG fairly quickly. and there's so many jobs, like if you want to join like off-chain labs, we're hiring aggressively. If you want to build applications on Arbitrum and sort of set your rules, like come talk to us, or just like start building. We have Discord, we have Twitter, like you can come up to us in person, like let's build out the future together.
Yeah, love that. So the time to start building is right now.
Right now.
Right now.
Go.
Awesome.
What are you still doing watching this? Go build.
Yeah, go build right now. All right, yeah, thank you so much, Lumi, for all the insights, both on the ZK side and also on the scaling side as well. Really loved having you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a great podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Cheers.